I have helped them to lose weight sustainably and improve their health, and I didn't touch their diets.
That recipe that we give people for weight loss, it is the perfect way to make sure that this person is as hungry as possible.
Where you eat is also important. Who you eat with is also important. When you eat is important. How you eat is important.
So the standard advice for decades has been just like you explained, pushing based on this idea of pushing a caloric-centric, a calorie-centric paradigm of you have to be in a negative caloric state in order to lose weight, and thus you should exercise more to increase that caloric expenditure and eat less to reduce the caloric intake. And it just doesn't play out that way. I actually use an analogy with my students to help them understand why that paradigm fails so often in practice. And I do it sort of as follows. I mention this imaginary situation where I tell the students, I'm inviting all of you to my house. We're going to have a delicious buffet of the most incredible foods you can imagine. I have the best chefs in the world coming to prepare this food. I want you to come hungry and eat as much as you want, as much as you'd like of these incredible foods. And so then having presented that situation, ask the students, what would you do to ensure you came to my home as hungry as possible? I give them a few minutes to chat with their fellow students, their neighbors, and they invariably come to a conclusion. They would fast or skip meals in the time preceding this event, and they would exercise more. And so then I tell them, does that advice sound familiar? You just gave me the perfect solution to come as hungry as possible. And then it dawns on them. That recipe that we give people for weight loss and have been giving them for 60 years, it is the perfect way to make sure that this person is as hungry as possible. And in our environment of readily accessible foods, hunger always wins. It takes an incredible person I don't know what the mentality would have to be able to deprive themselves of food to cope with that hunger, which would be gnawing at them all the time. And people nowadays focus so much on metabolic rate. Well, you got to do this to increase your metabolic rate, or do this to not let it decrease. Now, for whatever that's worth, and it's not as much as people think, eating less and exercising more is a wonderful way to reduce metabolic rate. And in that lowered metabolic rate, when you eventually break and start eating again as much as you want, and you're sick of depriving yourself, and you're sick of that constant hunger, you will overshoot and gain the weight back so readily. That is why people always have that yo-yo dieting. It's because they're focusing on hunger and deprivation and to be in this caloric deficit. And then, like I'd mentioned earlier, though, the alternative to this perspective, if we put that calorie-centric paradigm to the side and we accept that there is an alternative explanation, or at least another side to the coin, not that one is exclusive to the other, but we embrace this idea that there is an endocrine or a hormone variable here as well, and namely that is insulin. You cannot make a fat cell grow unless insulin is elevated. It can be swimming in a sea of calories and it won't grow. In contrast, you can't make a fat cell shrink unless insulin is low. Insulin simply won't let it happen, even if there's a caloric deficit. So my sentiment is we can embrace that both of these are relevant, but I strongly encourage people to focus on the endocrine component first, because if someone can manipulate their diet in such a way to lower their insulin, but not have to be hungry all the time, then they can start addressing at least one component, and then they will lose weight and get to a level. Now, if they've gotten to the level they want to get to, well, then they're done. Just keep doing that. If they get to a new normal and they've plateaued before they've wanted, all right, now we can scrutinize the other side of the coin, and let's look at what your calories are. Is now this excess energy preventing you from losing further weight? But that first step of acknowledging the relevance of insulin can be taken without the need to focus on calorie number, which is a tedious, often fruitless thing that ends up just frustrating people. When you're constantly counting calories in and trying to do your best to monitor calories out, it's such a circus. There are so many variables that are overlooked. So focus first on the endocrine component of obesity, namely controlling the insulin, which can be done without hunger. And we can get into that more, of course, and then subsequently focus on the caloric component. That's my recommendation. But even then, I would say it all starts with insulin and its effects on the fat cell.
So let's give a refresher, right? Let's give a refresher to the podcast listeners on just the basics of insulin, its role in the body, its relationship to the different functions that it has, and specifically what is happening, what mechanisms are happening when it interacts with a cell related to energy and fat cells. So yeah, let's give the basics of it.
Yeah. So insulin is a small hormone that's produced from the pancreas. It is flowing through all of our blood right now as we listen. Unless we're a type 1 diabetic, we're making it and it's always there. In the case of a type 1 diabetic, the life-saving therapy is insulin injections, which is a necessary part of that disease to allow the person to live a perfectly normal, healthy life. That is what insulin is. Its main effect, its classic effect, is to lower blood glucose. In other words, someone eats a meal that is rich in carbohydrates, their glucose levels will climb, and you see this very readily, of course, as you're wearing your CGM. In fact, I'm wearing mine. We see the glucose levels climb. That can't stay high for too long. If glucose stays elevated, if the body stays in a state of hyperglycemia in the high hundreds, getting to the 200s, if it were to stay there, it would be lethal and it would eventually kill us. In fact, quite quickly. I mean, like within a day, potentially, if it stayed that high for too long. So insulin comes in to save the day. And again, insulin's prototypical action is to look at that high glucose, come in and basically open the doors to cells to allow the glucose to come from the blood into the cells. And mostly this is coming into the muscle. Muscle is the main consumer of the glucose at any point, even during rest, as you and I are very sedentary now conversing. Insulin's the main consumer. Muscle is the main consumer of that glucose. So glucose comes up.
One thing that you can explain there, so for people that are listening, and we have some questions a little bit later on, why is muscle the main consumer of the glucose?
Yeah. So muscle has really by mass, because we have so much muscle, it is the highest single metabolic rate organ in the body. So it has a high demand for energy, and because it uses glucose so readily, ends up being the glucose sink. It's just the main consumer of the glucose. Now, let's kind of flip that a little bit. If we only had as much muscle as, say, we had the same muscle, same mass as our brain, but of course we have much more mass of muscle than we do brain. Brain is itself a much higher metabolic rate organ than muscle. It's just we have so much more muscle.
Our total muscle is much higher.
That's right. But if it were kind of gram for gram, the brain is several times higher than the muscle is, several times. In fact, interestingly, the kidney is several times higher than the brain, actually. So the kidney is the single highest metabolic rate organ by far. And then brain is up there too, and then muscle is lower. So just by mass and metabolic rate, muscle is the main consumer. So insulin, glucose comes up from what we've eaten. Insulin comes up to save the day. It pushes the glucose back down, then insulin comes back down, having done its job. But this paradigm is very important, and we can come back to that once we start defining insulin resistance, the glucose and the insulin. Now, that's insulin's main effect. But you touched on this in the kind of prelude to this question. Insulin does far more than that. Once again, there's nuance that is just so often ignored. I'd already mentioned the effects of insulin on fat cells, but if we extend that, it really represents the theme of insulin at every cell in the body. And I do mean every cell. Literally, Every single cell in the body is responsive to insulin. There are insulin receptors on every cell, essentially little doors that only insulin can come and knock on. And having knocked on the door of the cell, it tells the cell to do something. The cell will respond to insulin. Now, because every cell has insulin receptors and every cell does different things, it's not surprising that insulin will do different things at different cells. But all of them fit into a theme, which is store energy. Anabolic. It is pull in nutrients, pull in fats, pull in amino acids, pull in glucose, and make something out of it. That's, of course, an essential process. That anabolic aspect of insulin is critical to insulin's role, which is why insulin is an essential hormone for human survival. We need that to happen. It's just when insulin is elevated too much for too long, as it is in most people these days in the US and abroad, then we're constantly telling the body to store energy, and it becomes hard to use the energy to break things down. And we have to break things down for human health, not only just to shrink a fat cell, but even like muscle cells. People don't realize that even for healthy muscle to grow and stay big, we must be building and breaking, building and breaking. We want to be anabolic and catabolic. It's just that the net effect is going to be more anabolic than catabolic. But if you don't have a catabolic window, the anabolic reactions stop. You can't constantly be anabolic at the muscle. You can't constantly be telling muscle to grow. In so doing, it starts to diminish the responsiveness to the growth signal. Like insulin, the muscle starts to become insulin resistant. We have to have times of breaking, and that can only breaking so-called, and by that I mean like the cellular process of autophagy. If we don't have time for the cell to break down some molecules and build them back up better than before, then it is a negative effect. We are diminishing returns to the point that we actually start losing. Even when we're still demanding that the cells are anabolic, the cells simply stop responding. And namely, that would be evidence of insulin resistance. So insulin's thematic effect throughout the body is anabolic. It is build, 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 make things. And that is, of course, essential. We need our muscles and our bones to have that anabolic signal, but it can't be incessant. There must be periods of when it stops and the cell can break down what's getting old. And the problem there, Dhru, of course, is that nowadays, because people have been told you need to eat a high-carb diet filled with starches and even sugars, unfortunately, and you need to eat every 2 hours or so. We're told to eat 6 mini meals per day. That means from the moment the person wakes up, they spike their glucose and the insulin follows. And, 2 or so hours later, when the insulin, the glucose is coming back down to normal, we bump it back up again. We bump it back up again. So the average person is spending every waking moment from within minutes of waking up to well past the time they've gone to bed with elevated insulin.
Because their glucose levels are high, right? So
they keep spiking. Yep.
They keep on spiking. They keep on eating. It might even be that gluten-free muffin, which is going to spike.
Oh, absolutely.
It's going to be
absolutely.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that you pointed that out. One of the great myths of modern processed packaged foods is that people will look at the gluten-free thing, whatever it is, and assume, oh, well, that's not going to have as much of a metabolic effect. In fact, quite the opposite. More often than not, what they've done in order to keep this gluten-free something have a similar presentation and a similar taste and feel to the gluten normal product is it will be enriched with things like tapioca starch, which gram for gram will increase blood glucose more than the wheat would have with all of its terrible gluten.
Or brown rice syrup or these other items to pump
That's
up
exactly right.
the sugar. So even people, this is why I think this podcast is very helpful for even an audience that considers themselves as healthy individuals, because there are things that in the nature of processed foods being so pervasive throughout the world, it's not just Cheetos and Doritos and Pepsi. It's actually a lot of the food by percentage at Whole Foods and other grocery stores that we shop at that we think are healthy. Now they're well-meaning and they're trying to provide options and better for you things that are there. But it is important to understand that these foods that are constantly, that we're eating, that are quote unquote healthy, when they constantly pump up our blood glucose, you're going to see higher levels of insulin. And then you hinted at it, you talked about a term, you talked about insulin resistance. So how is that higher level of insulin now related to insulin resistance in the body? And what does that actually mean?
Yeah, excellent. So now we're coming to what's at my heart and soul, professionally speaking. So insulin resistance it really is an epidemic that is the single most common health disorder in the world. In the US alone, it affects potentially up to 88% of adults. So this is a problem that is just phenomenally relevant. And it is very close levels, in some places even worse, in virtually all of the countries in the Middle East and North Africa. They have worse metabolic health than adults do in the US. China and India are very close to this. This is a problem that is just spreading around the world, as what was once a so-called Western diet is really becoming the global diet, unfortunately. So just to help people appreciate just how widespread this is, insulin resistance is really, let's go back to that glucose insulin paradigm. So someone who's constantly spiking their glucose is constantly spiking their insulin. And the insulin will lag behind. So you and I are wearing our continuous glucose monitors. We'll see our glucose come up and down. Let's just say it gets back to normal within 2 hours. Insulin doesn't come down that quickly. Its effects will linger, and it will then slowly come down after the glucose. So eventually the person gets to a state where this incessant stimulus with insulin starts to make the body resistant to insulin, because that is a fundamental principle of biology. Too much of something will result in a resistance to that something. So as the body is swimming in a sea of insulin's always elevated, it starts to need more and more insulin to get the same effect. But then we get to this paradigm that I said I'd come back to, where the person has normal glucose levels, but they have vastly elevated insulin. This right here is a perfect kind of textbook state of insulin resistance. Insulin is working well enough, despite needing several times more than we had before, to keep the glucose at a normal level. Unfortunately, because we look at metabolic health almost strictly through the lens of glucose control, we have the patient coming in year after year, and we see that their glucose is normal. Glucose is normal, so you're fine. You don't have any metabolic problems. But if we shifted this paradigm away from the glucose-centric model to appreciate the relevance of insulin, we would have detected 10 or 20 years earlier that the insulin is several times higher than it should be. But then we only detect the problem once the body has become so resistant to its own insulin that insulin can no longer keep glucose in check, and now the glucose starts to climb. Now we detect the problem clinically. Now we diagnose them as having some metabolic problem like type 2 diabetes. So the tragedy in continuing to focus on glucose as the primary metabolic marker is that we diagnose the problem, the true problem, far years, even decades later than we could have. But that same glucose-centric paradigm also causes us to treat problems worse. We aren't addressing the true problem. So for example, back to this paradigm of the glucose being low and insulin high, eventually the glucose is climbing. Now we detect the problem. And conventional medicine would say, well, let's just lower your glucose by any means, including pushing your insulin up to even higher levels than you could get on your own. And so we give the type 2 diabetic insulin therapy or drugs that stimulate even greater release of insulin from the pancreas. So we push the insulin up to super physiological levels, and now we drive the glucose down to normal. The evidence, the proof that that paradigm is so problematic is in the fact that when we do that with a type 2 diabetic, despite the excellent glucose control, they get fatter and sicker and die faster than they did before. And I mean it. Their risk of Alzheimer's goes up by double, relevant to the brain. Their risk of heart disease mortality triples. Their risk of cancer mortality doubles to the same degree that Alzheimer's doubles. So we are making them fatter and sicker than before, and we're doing it in the midst of much better glucose control. Because it's not the glucose, it's the insulin. So insulin resistance, again, to define it maybe more explicitly, is that insulin isn't working normally at all the various cells in the body, and insulin levels themselves are elevated. That is an essential aspect of true insulin resistance. Insulin is high. but it's not working the same way that it used to. Those are sort of the two pillars of insulin resistance. And then the effects are myriad. It's far beyond just being relevant to type 2 diabetes. And,
right.
and I won't.
A whole host of things inside of the book that insulin can be connected to, because I think, again, people are listening to this are like, well, I'm not really worried about type 2 diabetes and I feel like I'm pretty healthy. But you talk about erectile dysfunction. You talk about migraines, right? Let's just take those two as categories of things that a lot of people suffer from. How could insulin resistance be connected to those two as an example?
Yeah, I love that you bring those up. Yeah, in fact, there was a manuscript that mentions in the title that something like, is erectile dysfunction the earliest symptom of insulin resistance in men? And this is a function of a failure of insulin to regulate blood vessel control as well as it could before. So normally, insulin will flow across a capillary, these teeniest of the blood vessels, and tell the blood vessels to dilate. It'll tell them to get bigger. Of course, that is essential for male fertility. We have to have that insulin-induced vasodilation for a man to be able to be fertile. The failure of insulin, so as those capillaries, those little blood vessels become insulin resistant, now the blood vessels can't dilate, it can't increase blood flow, and now the man fails at fertility. His most essential event with his physiology, his erection, is no longer capable of it. But if we extend that same blood vessel observation throughout the body, we also can explain why insulin resistance is the single most common explanation for hypertension. So someone who's coming into the clinic with normal glucose levels, yet insulin resistance, and the physician indicates that the person has high blood pressure or hypertension, they will just give the person a blood pressure medication, which will control blood pressure, but it's not addressing the fundamental cause of the problem, which is the insulin resistance. If that physician, having detected hypertension, asked, I wonder what the insulin levels are, he or she would detect elevated insulin, sign of insulin resistance, and then say, let's address the insulin resistance, and that will correct the hypertension and, of course, consequently correct the erectile dysfunction. But even in women, I won't elaborate any more beyond this, the most common infertility in women is polycystic ovarian syndrome, and at its core is a disease of insulin resistance. It is a metabolic problem at her ovaries, preventing the ovaries from making the normal amount of estrogens, preventing ovulation. So infertility in men and women is fundamentally rooted in insulin resistance. And then with migraines, as we move up to the brain, this is actually the case in migraines, in epilepsy, and in Alzheimer's disease. In all three of those seemingly totally unrelated neurological disorders, central nervous system problems, is an energy deficit. Briefly, the brain has, as we noted earlier, a very high energy demand. It is an energy hog all the time. Even when we're sleeping, the brain has a surprisingly high energy demand. Because of the average diet, the global diet being high in carbohydrates and high insulin, the brain is forced to get all of its energy from glucose, virtually 100%. And we can come back to this idea later with the alternative fuel not being available, and that's ketones, but that's a bit of a shift in topic. But the brain has a high energy demand, and because of conventional eating, glucose is the only viable fuel for the brain. Some of the brain's glucose uptake will be mediated by insulin, not all of it, but insulin facilitates some of the glucose that will get to the brain to meet the brain's energy demands. But as the brain starts to become insulin resistant, that demand, that actual glucose availability is deficient. We have a little energetic gap. The brain can't meet all of its energetic needs from glucose, and thus a pathology starts to present itself. Alzheimer's disease, we can detect this, and this is like truly detectable in humans. We can detect in Alzheimer's, epilepsy, and migraines, the brain isn't getting the same amount of glucose as we see the brain getting in a control human who doesn't have one of those pathologies. And so as the brains become insulin resistant, it's preventing, again, the brain from getting its energy from glucose. And now we have a problem manifesting. But that is why if we can improve insulin sensitivity at the brain by dietary manipulation, we start to correct that problem. In the case of migraines, There are studies from the 1920s, for heaven's sakes. I mean, we're talking like almost 100 years ago. We have evidence of a physician putting patients with migraine headaches onto low carbohydrate diets. And it is profound what this physician noted in this manuscript, highlighting the effect that each individual subject, something that just doesn't really happen these days. And almost all of them, it said, upon entering ketosis, which is the state that I've been alluding to and haven't really defined yet, but basically a low-carb diet, upon adopting a low-carbohydrate diet, which is the best way to improve insulin sensitivity, the migraines cease entirely. And that's a common phenomenon where a person will go either they stop having migraines completely, or they go down by like to like a tenth of what they were before. And I've seen this even right here in my department at my university. I had a colleague who heard me elaborating on this phenomenon, and he went from having 2 serious migraines a week to having about 2 a year. And it's almost always because he indulges in something, spikes his glucose levels to a high level, and then has the migraine kind of returning. So with migraine headaches, as we see with other neurological disorders, it's likely at least part of it is at least explained by an energetic deficit. There is a gap in energy that the brain can't make up for in an insulin resistant state. That once we address the insulin resistance, we start to address that energetic gap, and then the disorder starts to improve.
And you were starting to get into the microbiome.
Yeah.
And that's a big section inside the book.
Yeah.
Take us down the path.
Yes. So this is really to put the power into people's hands fully and completely. And unfortunately, a lot of the diet frameworks revolve around the same kind of concepts. But it's so much deeper. Like you just said, the body is remarkably intelligent and so resilient. This is why we're able to still sustain the amount of damage that we do to ourselves through our diet and through our lifestyle. Now, how do we actually support and create optimal function of a human being? And this gets into really, when we talk about the microbiome, this is kind of like the final frontier where we're at now. And it's so fascinating because when I was in school, again, my typical university, college nutritional science class, I was taught that the number one matriarch, patriarch, warden, emperor, everything, the tip of the spear is calories.
Right.
If we just manage these calories, we're going to be able to lose weight. Calories in versus calories out. All you got to do is expend more energy than you take in. End of story. And my college professor was right on the borderline of being obese. He was doing the thing that he was teaching, but clearly it wasn't working. And this is the problem with our diet frameworks. Even if we get some results, many of us, and I know that I've done the same thing, something might work for a year, maybe 2 years, but all of a sudden something is off. And we blame ourselves that we're not doing the diet hard enough. I just need to keto harder. I just need to vegan harder. And not understanding that each and every one of these movements is going to be unique to us. We all have a unique metabolic fingerprint that has never existed before in human history, happening right now, and will never exist in the future. This is a unique thing. And the craziest thing is that even us right now, you and I, tomorrow, our metabolism is going to be different than today. Not much, but it's going to be different. The microbes, the cascade, everything, we're going to be slightly different. And that's the beauty. But if we don't learn how to adapt as we go along, we're going to continue to disempower people. And they're going to keep blaming themselves. But it's just getting the right education. So when we're talking about that unique metabolic fingerprint, it starts with the microbiome. And this is highlighted in a study that determined that your microbes are determining what your body does with the calories you eat. My professor didn't tell me this. All right. He didn't know. We know now. And many folks who've been at the cutting edge of this space for a long time, they know that there were things controlling what calories do. And the calorie conversation was not the end all be all. So what they found was, this was highlighted in the journal Cell. They found that there's specific bacteria in mice that actually block their intestines from absorbing as many calories from their food. All right. Now, our allopathic approach would be like, we need to capsule up whatever bacteria that is, give it out to people so their intestines stop absorbing as many calories. And this is, again, looking at everything from that
Reductionist.
Yes, from this very limited perspective, this tunnel vision. And also, of course, it's just like, for some folks, like, well, that's a mouse study. I know, I got you. In the human realm, and this was conducted by researchers at the Weizmann Institute, and this was the same thing. In my clinical practice, I could have somebody to go and get a stool sample, and I can get their paperwork back and look at the diversity of their microbes. And without ever even seeing what they look like, I can know if they're obese based on their diversity of their microbes. All right. We know this very clearly now. And so what the researchers have kind of labeled this is a very short, statement on is this, quote, fat bacteria. There's a bacteria cascade that is directly associated with obesity and diabetes. We know this. Your gut reflects what's happening with your body composition. And what the researchers did was they took these, quote, fat bacteria from obese test subjects and implanted those into healthy mice, lean mice. And they took samples from lean human subjects and implanted those into lean mice. The mice that were implanted with the fat, quote, fat bacteria from obese test subjects gained weight, gained body fat, and became insulin resistant. And the mice receiving the normal human samples did not. Changing the microbes changes your metabolism. And this is highlighted best. There was a study done on identical twins, all right? They're identical. You can't get a better, like, what happens with one or the other with this situation. And they took a look at their microbes, their cascade of bacteria, the diversity of their gut bacteria. And they found if one of the identical twins had a bacteria cascade that was, again, associated with obesity, associated with insulin resistant, versus one who had a healthy bacteria cascade, they allowed them into the study. And although these identical twins are eating the same diet, same household, the one who had the cascade associated with diabetes and obesity gained weight while the other did not, eating the same diet. All right. This goes beyond the realm of just managing calories. All right. And this is what so many people have been fighting with their whole lives and just blaming themselves, because even this getting put into popular culture as being what the issue is, this was largely thanks to a woman named Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters.
Right.
All right.
I love that section of the book where you sort of break down the history. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about her, what she found, and how she wrote this bestseller at the time that completely changed how we all see calories.
Yeah. If you just ever wonder, where did the calories come from, or where did our system being so focused on calories, where did that whole idea start? Well, you got to understand that when calories were first discovered, it wasn't even for nutrition. They weren't looking for something to measure the energy in food. It was used in physics and engineering. And it wasn't until Wilbur Atwater really kind of made that transition over into the nutritional domain. And automatically, the system was very flawed from the get-go, because they would use a bomb calorimeter where they would take the food and put it into a container, then put that container into another container filled with water, and they use electrical energy to incinerate that food. And whatever energy was used to heat that water up, that was how they measured the energy in the food. But this negates the complexity of human digestion automatically, because it's incinerating everything in that food, whereas we don't even absorb everything in the food remotely. Like, even if the term fiber, for example, that's going to create a net like gain on how many calories you're going to consume or absorb, or a different net gain in the amount of carbohydrates you're going to take in, right? So automatically it's flawed from the get-go. But Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters is who popularized it with her nutritional bestseller, Focused on Calories, The Key to Calories. This was in the early part of the 1900s, and she sold over 2 million copies of this book. So I'm talking about everybody had this book. If you could read you got this book. And this was the beginning of the change. And I want to make this very clear here today. And I already highlighted it a little bit, because I definitely want to talk about the brain. Food is one of the most powerful instruments in our universe for health and for happiness, but it's also a potential weapon for degradation and disease. The food that we eat creates everything about us. Our brains, our eyes, the folks that are listening, their ears, the tiny little bones that are vibrating and picking up sound and sending signals to the brain. Every one of those steps is based on food. Every one of those systems. Your heart is made from the food that you eat. Your brain is made from the food that you eat. Everything about you is made from food.
The ink of the 3D printer that created us is food.
Exactly. At its core, we are a conglomeration of the food that we've taken in, or the lack thereof. All right. And so with that being the premise, food is such a powerful, dynamic, multifaceted entity. Yet it was in that moment with Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters that it made the shift from food being this dynamic, multifaceted, powerful entity to being numbers. This was the shift to looking at food as numbers. And she said it. She said, you will no longer eat bread. You will no longer eat one slice of bread. You will eat 100 calories of bread. You will no longer eat a slice of pie. You'll eat 350 calories of pie. Food was numbers now. And she relented that a woman of her height could eat whatever she wanted as long as she maintained a strict diet of 1,200 calories a day. That's it. And here's the side note that people don't get. She battled with her weight her entire life.
Right, especially that time period that she was popular and her book came out. You look at history, you're starting to see in America specifically a large accumulation of weight amongst people, where previously, you know, prior to like the 1850s, that wasn't a thing really, right? You didn't have people getting obese that way. Well, what came around that time period is our modern industrialization. So they thought, you know, she and largely a lot of other people that were in that same field, they thought that they had discovered something, the answer to that question. But I cut you off, so please continue.
Yeah, you just said it precisely. You know, we're trying to explain away the shift that had taken place from us having more of a diet that was based on nature to a diet that's really based on agriculture, like hardcore. And not just agriculture at this point, but like heavily processed foods. They're really knocking on the door of becoming the norm. And so what I leaned into this story in the beginning was this was also not just a shift to thinking of food in terms of numbers, but a shift to thinking and relating food to morality. This was the scariest part. When I went back and read her old writings in this kind of old fangled book, I was shocked at how she was relating weight challenges as a character defect, you know? And again, her being someone who struggled with her weight her entire life, she was battling internally. And she related food to words like punishment and sin. And also this was a major shift in our association with diet and weight loss, because she associated diet success with you being hungry. If you're hungry, you're doing it right. And I've dealt with this so many times with patients coming in and working with clients over the years. And so she said, when you have hunger, when you have that hunger pang, you should have a double joy, knowing that you're saving the hunger pangs of another person, because there was like some food rationing going on around the world, time of World War I. And so she leveraged that. She used that psychologically to make folks strive to be hungry. And now we know hunger is a signal from your body that something is wrong. It's data, it's feedback. And I go through and Eat Smarter and finally open up the entire conversation, because many of our colleagues as well have really talked about our satiety and hunger hormones as being like leptin and ghrelin, right? It's just these two guys, but they're kind of like the captains of the team. There's so many other players. You know, we've got CCK, we've got GLP-1, we've got PPY. There's so many different hunger and satiety related neurotransmitters and hormones that are going on that are regulating the system. And what we have to do to keep these things in balance is provide the nutrients necessary for them to work. And a big takeaway from today is that chronic nutrient deficiency leads to chronic overeating. All right. That's at the heart of it. A lot of our hunger is not, we can get into a conversation about how food manufacturers have hijacked this wiring. But at the end of the day, it's really about us taking back control and giving our bodies the raw materials it needs for our hormones to work correctly.
You know, when you were talking about, what was the machine that they were using to measure out the calories?
Bomb calorimeter.
Bomb calorimeter. That actually sounds like a positive thing, but it's funny. What a funny name.
Right. You're the bomb.
You're
calorimeter.
the bomb. It reminds me a lot of, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but NASA has the largest vacuum in the world, and they have it to basically test space shuttles. And there's a YouTube video, we'll link to it in the show notes, but they basically talk about, okay, what happens when you drop a bowling ball and a feather at the same time in a vacuum? Well, you watch the video, bowling ball and a feather, you drop them same time in a vacuum, largest vacuum, can fit a space shuttle. they both drop at the same rate. But here on Earth, which is like here in our digestion, here in our body, where there's so many different mechanisms that are happening, things are pushing up against each other. You drop a bowling ball and a feather from a 747, they're not going to drop at the same rate because there's friction, there's air, there's stuff that's interacting with it. And this is all just a larger part of, take us back to the beginning part of the conversation, is that when you understand this, you stop looking at the world through these almost arcane ideas. Maybe they were well-intentioned back then, but we don't need Lulu Von Peters or whatever her name was.
Lulu Von Peters.
We don't
I like
need her,
that better.
we don't need her whispering in our ear anymore, but you would think that she still is, with how many people that still look at diet and eating through that lens.
I'm just thinking about what she would whisper. She'd be like, "You're hungry, aren't you?"
That's a good thing.
It's a good thing. You're doing it right.
I don't think I'm a good whisperer.
So, this is, like you just said, I think that we tend to think we're so evolved in our thinking. But the reality is, and for all of us to just embrace this, we know next to nothing. We are so far from understanding how dynamic and amazing the human body is. We do know a lot more than we used to, for sure. But again, our system is still trying to zoom in and find the things, the small things that make things go wrong, instead of looking at the overarching things that control what our genes are doing. And I talked to you about this before the show. I have a cognitive bias. I'm very aware of my cognitive bias. And I think it's a bit more mature, but because number one, I realize that we know next to nothing, which is a strong thing to say. But I do realize, and my cognitive bias is that if an injunction comes in, or if a recommendation comes in that it gets us away from normal human functioning, what we know to be normal, sunlight exposure, community, access to basic nutrients, essential nutrients, movement, being able to be restricted and not be able to have movement, things that disrupt our sleep. If any of these things come up, and these are just a sampling, a red flag goes up for me and I immediately have hesitation. I'm like, whoa. But I'm still not negating the fact that maybe this new data is possible, but I have a strong cognitive bias. I'm aware of that if it gets away from normal human functioning. And what I mean by that is there are specific things that our genes expect us to do, that we have a modicum of understanding. Our genes expect us to move. Our genes expect us to move.
That's the environment that they grew up in.
Exactly. So when we're not moving, when we become sedentary, these epigenetic programs, and I just had this wonderful conversation with cell biologist, Dr. Bruce Lipton. And also he's one of the people who really impressed upon culture. He might be the biggest voice in epigenetics, and how epigenetics being above genetic control, how our environment controls what's happening with our genes. But more than that, our thoughts. This is the biggest thing. And of course, I do talk about this towards the end of Eat Smarter as well, and how our psychology affects what our DNA is doing, how our psychology affects what food does to us. And this was highlighted in a study in the book from Dr. Alia Crum and her team. And they had folks to consume a milkshake. They just made up a batch of milkshakes. And one of them, they put two different labels on them. One was labeled Sensa Shake. Sensible is like, and they basically wrote on there, it's like 120 calories sensible shake. Then they had another shake that was labeled indulgent, right? It's like 600 calories indulgent, But the reality was they were both, it was right in the middle. It was like somewhere around 350 calories, 380 calories. But based on the person's belief, when they saw the smoothies, the shakes labeled as being indulgent or sensible, it changed the chemistry in their bodies when they drank the shake. The folks who had the indulgent shake, thinking they're consuming more calories than they actually were, produced more leptin. They produced more of the satiety hormone, and they had a greater reduction in ghrelin. Their bodies, are kind of the primary hunger hormone. Their satisfaction went up just based on their belief that it was more calories in the food, dramatically. And the folks who had the Sensa Shake, their ghrelin levels barely budged. They were still hungry, but they had the same amount in reality.
It's wild. And it really makes you think, especially with a year like 2020, with the pandemic and all the stuff that's been going around there, just your belief systems around even interacting with other people, especially for a lot of kids. You know, they kind of, even my niece, I was spending some time with her this past weekend, and my family's very aware and they're understanding and they're trying to follow the regulations of the school and everything, but understands that, okay, there's a deeper conversation than what we're being told over here. Yes, you might want to be safe and smart about certain stuff, but no, we shouldn't be afraid of people. But, you know, kids look around and they notice and they see how people are interacting, especially very young kids. And then having a negative association of like, can I hug somebody? Can I, you know, is that okay to be with them? Can I go up to this other person? It's amazing when you look into it, just how much our thoughts play a role into the makeup of how our body feels.
Yeah, exactly. You know, because those responses, when you feel that hesitation, that nervousness around other humans, that's chemistry being created in your body. Every thought you have has correlating chemistry that's produced in your body. This is incredibly powerful. Your brain is the most powerful pharmacy in the known universe. And I say that because it's making the chemicals specifically designed for you. It's bioidentical for real. You know, this isn't just like you're taking some external substance that your body, your liver has to try to figure out. Now, with that said, you know, this is something we talked about as well. We have to be mindful, and I don't feel that there were enough voices in the room making the decisions about how this has been handled clearly, because of the very, very critical, especially in that elementary school age, of the social and emotional development of the human brain. This is so important because some of this stuff can create permanent damage if children aren't able to develop that social and emotional skill. You know, like you need to be able to like take the kid's toy and like see what the response is and to like get that physical feedback. And my son, you know, fortunately we have, you know, his best friend lives next door, so they've had each other. But they have a friend who they go to school with who hasn't seen another child in 5 months. And we both had that same thing. Even when I shared the story, like, oh, that's going to be a problem. And so many children, we're being inundated. Unfortunately, there's a level of intelligence and safety, but then there's a level of extreme, which is where we're leaning towards, of children being led to believe and taking on the idea that they're not enough, that their body isn't enough, that they're not safe in this world. And we really need to talk about this. Like, we really need to look at this, because we can be creating an entire generation of humans who are afraid of other humans. And that was my concern at the very beginning. Or just
even afraid of getting sick.
Right.
Just the fear of getting sick is going to make you more likely to get sick.
Exactly. And this isn't just like hearsay. We know this, that we got data on this. And there's an entire biology of fear. You know, when you're having these stressful thoughts, when you're tuned into the news and you're seeing a death toll ticker, when humans have been relented to being numbers on a screen, no longer souls, you become conditioned to you start to see the world very differently. And bringing that into the world itself, it can start to create so many very strange like biases, as we talked about before. And for me, I think, and this is it's a tough subject to talk about, but a big part of the reason I do what I do, even writing this book, is my concern about our future generations, my concern about our children. And for this to be happening right now, I think it's actually wonderful. And I know it's kind of messed up to say, but I think it's because we had so many issues festering underneath the surface that we're not getting addressed. The child abuse, the sexual abuse, the problems with our education system, the massive problems with the education system, our workforce. And I know you've done stuff on this as well, and looking at the rates of unhappiness in our culture. And we're going into an education system that gets us ready to do a job that many people are unhappy about. And they spend their lives, that's their lot in life. And we can do something better. At this point as humanity, we can reimagine these things. We can reimagine these systems. But this at its core is supposed to be a health issue. And yet we are the most unhealthy society in the history of humanity, self-inflicted.
Right. Yeah, I heard a quote that you shared earlier, and I posted it today, and it said, you know, especially when you look at the lens of the pandemic and what we went through, chronic disease, which impacts so many different things. The inputs of chronic disease don't just create chronic disease. They can create chronic divisiveness, which we'll go into in a second, which you said chronic disease loaded the gun and COVID pulled the trigger. Thought that was great. I don't know if you posted it out as a quote, but I definitely reshare that.
Yeah, this is the thing that, I shared data on this very early on when I saw the data coming out of Italy from their health minister. And he affirmed that 88% of the folks who lost their lives there had one or more pre-existing chronic diseases. About half of them had two or more. And for me, as soon as I saw the data, I was just, I was trying to do the, the Paul Revere thing, like, hey, we've got a problem here in America. We're very susceptible. And then sure enough, ultimately, the CDC published a report just a couple months ago that 94% of the folks who lost their lives had an average of 2.6 pre-existing chronic diseases, most notably being hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. And a lot of folks don't realize that when we're talking about these obesity numbers, obesity is associated with about 400,000 deaths every year. Not just this year, every year. And it's not just like, oh, this is a side note thing. This is a major issue. And the systems that encourage and support and even make money off of the sickness of our population are still running things. And we're still thinking we're deficient on a drug. Like we just need a drug to save us. We needed somebody to come through and provide this thing. We're inherently flawed. And these are the system itself is designed in such a way that if you're well, you have no value to the system. We need sick people. It's the farming of sick people. And so 94% of the folks in the United States who lost their lives, 2.6 pre-existing chronic diseases. We can look at this from the mindset of like, oh, they were going to die anyways. No, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. Being exposed to an infectious disease when you are already susceptible, when your immune system is already compromised, radically increases your incidence of severe and or untimely death, severe symptoms or untimely death. But the media focuses on the 6% who are healthy. And they just tell you the stories of the person who's he's a college student, he's perfectly healthy, but they don't tell you about the 94%.
Right. And even that person may not have a diagnosable chronic disease.
Right.
But as we know, and as I talk about deeply in the world of functional and integrative medicine, you can still have major things going on with you and not have a diagnosis.
And not just that, me and you, we can be as healthy as we want to be. We could have the best diet, we sleep well, all that stuff. We move well. But if we stray from those things that our genes expect us to do, if all of a sudden I'm sleep deprived, now I'm going on 3 days, I'm trying to work on this project, I'm stressed out, I'm watching the news, whatever it is, even though on paper I'm healthy, right? I didn't have a diagnosis, I can compromise my immune system. As a matter of fact, the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology published a study, and they found that just one night of sleep deprivation leads to suppression of your immune system, most notably suppression of your natural killer cells, which the FDA fast-tracked drugs that target our NK cells because our NK cells were so effective at killing SARS-CoV-2 infected cells.
Right. So now you have an opening in the wall and something can come in, virus, pathogen, whatever, which normally your body would be able to block out. But we're all human beings. You can have a moment just like anybody else, and you can become susceptible.
This can happen to any of us at any time. This is why they're called opportunistic. This is why. And like we were talking about this before the recording, we all carry around pathogenic, opportunistic viruses, bacteria, fungi, things that can literally kill us if we become compromised. A lot of times we think we, quote, catch a bug, but many times it's actually something we already have in our system or on us.
Floating around.
Yeah, that we're already exposed to, that's already in our system that gets on top of us because our immune system is compromised.
Much in the same way that often now the understanding around things like the shingles, right? Mm-hmm. The understanding for like a lot of older adults can be at risk of shingles. Well, we know that the shingles virus has been inside of them before, but what causes it to be in a situation to be expressed?
Yeah.
Our immune system going down, maybe increased rates of inflammation inside the body, poor diet, lack of movement. All of a sudden, something that was there the whole time now can have a chance to grow. And I know you also had, we had him on and you had him on, Jason Fung, who talks about the whole new view of cancer inside the body. And the latest understanding of cancer is that cancer isn't so much of a disease that happens to us It's a survival mechanism when certain healthy cells get put in a specific environment.
So I haven't talked to him yet. We're getting it set up.
Okay.
But yes,
excuse that.
No, I'm very, of course, like we're on the same page with many of these things because, you know, we all have cancer cells every day. And it's just like, it doesn't exist in the popular narrative. We all have cancer cells every single day. It's just an almost normal part of cellular replication in a sense. It's not normal, it's abnormal, but it happens so often. But your immune system takes those rogue cells out. And then also, what about how are they getting fed, right? Angiogenesis. You know, they need blood vessels, they need a nutrient supply. We've got so many nutrients and foods and things that are clinically proven, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies finding that certain, like curcumin, for example, has anti-angiogenesis properties that cuts off the nutrient supply to cancer cells and fat cells. Fat cells, they need the same thing. They need that nutrient supply. But the thing about food is that it has an intelligence to it. It's selective because you don't want that to happen to all of your cells, right? Just the problematic places. And so, man, it's so remarkable that, again, we're starting to really open up the conversation and get some of this. And by the way, when you mention the shingles, the number one part here is that this virus is able to hide out in your nervous system. And we've evolved to our immune system to not attack our own nervous system. And so this is what makes it so clever. But what is the number one thing? Nervous system. It's related to stress. So guess when the flare-up's going to happen is when you are under stress. And this is the thing about the conversation of stress. We tend to think it's one very vanilla thing. Like, I'm not stressed about work, like whatever. You have an overall stress load, which includes, of course, work stress, relationship stress, exercise stress. Exercise is a hormetic stressor. It can be great for you, but you get the benefits when you recover. If we go through, me and you, we do a 30-minute, tough workout, we lifted, doing some, some metabolic work. And then we go get a blood panel done and a hormone panel, we're going to look really messed up. We're going to look, our blood sugar is going to be dysregulated. Stress hormones are going to be up. We might even have like some insulin resistance. We might walk away with the drug. Like we might get a prescription and all we did was do a workout and your body's trying to heal and sort it out. And that's the thing. Exercise is wonderful. However, if you add that on top of the other stress and then you add in environmental stress, right? You add in abnormal, this quote, light pollution that we're talking about today. You add in diet stress because diet is a major stressor potentially. It can be, again, a tool of healing and happiness or a weapon of degradation and disease. Your overall stress load, and then you're gonna eventually, it's just gonna be too much. It's like the bowling ball out of the 747, it's gonna drop. And so how do we address these things? And mainly, again, one of the most controllable, but also the most pervasive in our culture that has gotten away from us is our food. If we can get the food right, it makes everything else work better.
And the place that I want to dive right into is that no blame zone that you start the book off in. What do you mean by that? Let's expand.
I think you touched upon so many crucial aspects. Yes, around weight loss, Dhru, but also around health at large, because what you were speaking to there is this idea that we should all have autonomy. We should all have autonomy and sovereignty over how we wish to live. What do we want to do? As you say, if you want to do something for vanity, yeah, the conventional wisdom would say, no, you shouldn't be doing it for that reason. But even that word should is problematic, isn't it? Because we're all individuals. We've all got the right to pursue health, to pursue weight loss, to pursue happiness in whatever way we choose to. And, that point about you're in a no blame zone. The reason I started the book with that is because it really plays into why I wrote this book in the first place, Dhru, which was this idea that you see a lot. I see it in my profession. I see it on social media, that there is one way to lose weight. And if you cannot lose weight that way, then you're a failure. And not only will society give you this subliminal message that you're a failure, you believe that you are a failure. So the typical case I would see is in January, someone decides, right, I'm going to lose weight this year. I'm going to take charge of my health, and they will buy the latest diet book that's on the shelf. They'll choose one of the 10 or 20 books that are out at that time of year. Okay. I don't think it matters which one you choose to a certain degree, because I think all of them will work for 2 or 3 weeks if you actually follow what's in them. I think all of them will tend to work, but I don't think that that's what people are after. I don't think people are wanting, short-term weight loss. Really, in my 20 years experience of seeing patients, Dhru, people want real transformation. Yes, some want transformation in their physique, but many people want transformation in their energy levels, in the quality of their lives, in how they show up at work, how they show up in their relationships. And what I would see, Dhru, is that people would go on the diet in January, and by February or March, they'd be back in my clinic saying, Dr. Chatterjee, in January, I went on this diet. I did lose a little bit of weight, but now not only have I gone back to where I've started, I'm now a little bit heavier. But that's not the worst thing, Dhru. The worst thing is that they don't blame the diet. They blame themselves. They think that they're the failures, that I couldn't do it. I couldn't follow the formula. I'm weak. And then they start to feel shame. And shame is a toxic emotion. Shame never helps anybody change in the long term. Sure, it can help you in the short term. It very rarely helps you in the long term. So when I start the book saying you're not to blame, it's to really just say, hey, look, right at the start, it's to say, hey, look, I get it. It's tough. You have tried before. You may not have succeeded, but that's okay. I'm not going to blame you. Not only am I not going to blame you, there is no need to blame yourself, because I'm going to walk you through the real culprits here, the real reason why you are struggling to maintain your health and maintain your weight. But it's not about willpower. It's not about a moral failing that you have. It's not about the fact that you're weak when people around you are absolutely fine. No, your biology has changed. You probably were exposed to certain things in the environment that you weren't aware of, that has changed your biology, has changed the way you feel. And now you've ended up carrying excess weight. So you're not to blame. I'm here now to help you. And the sort of calling line at the top line of this book, really, Dhru, is that you can almost always help somebody lose weight in a sustainable way, in a scientifically responsible way, once you find the right approach for them. And that is what the entire book is about. It's basically saying, I want to help you find the right approach for you. Yeah, it may be that you need a new diet, but it may not. It may mean you need to improve your sleep. It may mean you need to work on your emotions or your stress or your environment. But whatever it is, I'm going to hold your hand through all the various aspects. And by the end of it, I'm going to help you figure out what you need to do to help you. And Dhru, it's interesting. The title of the book is not Lose Weight, Feel Great. It's Feel Great, Lose Weight. That was done for, a very, very important reason. And, I had long pushback with the publisher over this. That's the truth. And I'm going to help people feel great straight away. The weight loss is coming as a side effect. The weight loss is coming as a side effect of focusing on the creation of health. So there's quite a few things there, Dhru, I guess, that we could expand upon.
Yeah, and I think we'll a lot of layers, and we'll continue the conversation here. I wanted to interject with a little bit of I pulled up a definition between the difference between knowledge and wisdom, and I want to read it here to you and to our listeners, because I feel like as I was going through your writings and your conversations on this, and you've been talking about the subject for a while, we even talked about it a little bit on the last time we went into this around really how the old way and the old ideas and the old science around weight loss is just all antiquated. We need a different way of thinking about this. So I want to read this definition here that I pulled up from dictionary.com about knowledge and wisdom, and then I'll comment on it, and I want to get your perspective on it. So the primary difference between these two words is that wisdom involves a healthy dose of perspective and the ability to make sound judgments about a subject, while knowledge is simply knowing. Anyone can become knowledgeable about a subject by reading, researching, and especially memorizing facts. It's wisdom, however, that requires much more of an understanding and the ability to determine which facts are relevant in certain situations. Wisdom takes knowledge and applies it with discernment based on experience, evaluation, and lessons learned. When I was reading your book, the overwhelming feeling that I had was that this is weight loss wisdom. There's a lot of knowledge that's out there, but this is wisdom. And my perspective is that it really takes a person, it doesn't have to be a medical doctor. It could be some practitioner that's actually, could be a nurse, could be some practitioner, nutritionist that is actually working with patients one-on-one, not just writing books, not just having theories on Instagram, not just having their own N of one experience. I feel personally that it takes a doctor who is working with a lot of people from a lot of backgrounds, and they come to some conclusion that everything ends up working, but what works for you has to be based on what your uniques are. Would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, that was wonderful. So much there for me to reflect on, Dhru. I mean, if we just go back to those definitions for a second, which, were really quite thought-provoking, because we are living in a world, aren't we, where information and knowledge is freely available. It's widely available. We all consume knowledge on a daily basis. All of us, we become our own little experts. We go on our Instagram and we read a few posts, and we're always getting these new inputs of knowledge on a daily basis. And it's very easy to think that we have become knowledgeable, or as you say, we have wisdom. But the two things from your wisdom definition that really struck out to me was the word perspective. Wisdom requires a certain level of perspective. Wisdom also requires us to determine what facts are relevant. And it's really wonderful to hear that, because actually, in many levels, it really speaks to what evidence-based medicine actually is. Evidence-based medicine is really about wisdom, because evidence-based medicine has got three components to it. It is not just the published evidence, which many people believe it to be. And many people, particularly when we argue on social media or online, we're trying to argue with research and published evidence. And of course, that has real value. But evidence-based medicine is actually the intersection of three things: the published research evidence, patient preference, and clinical expertise and clinical experience, right? Those three things, it's where those three things meet in the middle. That is what evidence-based medicine is. And I feel this really speaks to what you were trying to get at, which is, I've been seeing patients now for 20 years, Dhru. So that's tens of thousands of patients. And you see enough patients with an open mind, and you realize actually that no one's the same. Everyone's got a different life story. Everyone's got a different relationship with health, with food, with stress, with sleep. Everyone's got different cultural beliefs about what the right way is to look after themselves and to live a healthy and happy life. And actually, the only way that I can help them is by absorbing all of that and determining, as you say in your definition, which facts are relevant here. You can go and see the study on low carb versus low fats and go, well, actually, it's clear cuts that this particular diet works better than that diet. Okay, fine. That's one research trial. Within that, there will be some people who did better on the other diets, because these trials are just giving us an average. They're giving us an overall, on balance, we feel that this particular diet does better than that one. But there's going to be outliers in each case. And so I would like to think that what I have, put together in this book is an accumulation of 20 years of experience, including things that I have got wrong in the past or things that my patients have taught me. And I thought, oh, wow. I don't feel I can have a bias towards one particular diet, because I don't feel it's my role as a doctor to do that. Because if my bias is, let's say, carnivore, right? It's not, but let's say it was, and a patient comes in, and that patient really doesn't want to, in their mind, harm any animals, and they believe that they shouldn't be eating any animal products, and they want to be a vegan, or they want to only eat plant foods, then I've got a problem as a doctor. Because if my bias is carnivore and my patient doesn't want to consume animal products, then I've got a real issue there in terms of trying to help them. And vice versa, my bias might be whole food plant-based. And then if someone, has got a friend who went on carnivore and their autoimmune problems got better and their skin got better and they've got more energy than they've ever had before, and they're saying, hey, doctor, look, I feel absolutely fantastic. And then I'm trying to say to them, yeah, but I think you should stop eating all animal products. There's going to be a complete dissonance and a disconnect between what I'm trying to do as a doctor and what that patient wants to hear. So for me, it always comes down to listening to the patient. What is it that they want? What is their current belief system? And then my job is to put it all together with something that's actionable and manageable for them. And I feel that, I couldn't have written this book, Dhru, 10 years ago, maybe not even 5 years ago, because, I really tried to simplify weight loss in a very readable way. And the thing with simplicity is, and I've realized this having written 4 books now, is that simplicity is actually the hardest thing. Trying to simplify concepts down so they're easy to read, it's something I work very, very hard on. And I think it's deceiving sometimes when you read or when one reads things that are simplified and thinking, oh, that's obvious. I get that. I hope it does come across like that, because that's the idea. But I guess I sort of feel I've gone off your question slightly. But I think wisdom is the key. Many of us think we're experts now, including myself in various things, right? But the truth is, you really want to be in the field for a period of time. And I tell you where I see this a lot, Dhru. I see a lot of younger healthcare professionals, or certainly in the UK, some medical doctors fresh out of med school. And they have the best, I've got to be careful how I say this. I don't want to be condescending to anyone. You can see that they have the best intentions in the world, but sometimes they see things very black and white. I was taught this at medical school. This is what the latest research says. This is the way to be. And you can sometimes see that. I go, you know what? I wonder if you'll still be thinking the same thing in 10 years' time, because when you have seen real life patients with real life problems, you realize that you need to suddenly get flexible up in your brain. You need to start improvising. You need to find alternative, different approaches for different people. And what I'd like to think I do with the framework I put together in Feel Great, Lose Weight is to bring all of that together in one place and say, listen, I can help you. Let me hold your hand through all the aspects that may be at play here. And then I'm going to help you figure out what is the right approach for you. And Dhru, I just tell you a little story. Before this book went to print, and in the UK, it went off to the printers last September, right? September 2020. And I'd edited the manuscript about 20 times. And Penguin in the UK was saying, look, this has to go to print now, or we're going to miss getting the books in stock for publication. And I was reading it through, and I emailed Penguin quickly. I said, listen, guys, I know I said I was done, but there is one more line that has to go in the book. And, I'm putting my foot down. It can't go to print until I put this in. And it's on the penultimate page of the book, Dhru. And it said something like this. And when your friends ask you what plan you're following, you can tell them that you no longer follow other people's plans, because you've been empowered to create your own. And And it was only after 6 or 9 months of working on the book that I actually got that line. And I was like, that's it. That's what makes us different, is that I'm not giving you the Dr. Chatterjee plan. I'm not giving you the Dr. Chatterjee diet. I'm saying, these are the areas I want you to look at in your life. And I'm going to give you a little toolkit at the end to figure out which ones are relevant for you. And then this is going to be your plan. You're going to own this plan. And I think that's controversial a little bit, Drew, because some people will say that people want to be told what to do. And I think they do to a certain degree. And I help people with that. But Drew, I don't know what you think about this, but I found over and over again that you can follow someone else's plan for a few weeks, maybe 2 or 3 months. But at some point, if that plan doesn't convert and change to being your own, where you feel empowered and you feel, I love that aspect of the plan, that really works for me, that bit's not working so well for me, I don't feel you can make that long-lasting change. And, I know you've been involved with many books in the past, and I think a lot of these short-term plans are great to help educate people and help them understand how good they could feel if they did A, B, and C. But at some point, I think you've got to stop following the plan, and you've got to be in charge of how you're living your life.
Yeah. And I think it's really the sophistication of where wellness is now. Those were great when maybe people didn't think that there was a difference between whole foods and processed foods, right? Yeah. Like those can be great. Just like, it's kind of like vanity. Vanity could kickstart you off, and there's no judgment on getting started. But if the primary reason that you're doing anything is for vanity or for maximization of, let's say, cash in business, if the primary reason that you're doing something is external, it's not going to be sustaining, because, as Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, and life punches us in the face a lot, right? You have kids and all of a sudden your sleep schedule's off, and then you need to do this. A family member goes through a health crisis, a pandemic happens, and you find yourself, as you've opened up, eating more sugar and, trying to balance things out. Like, life happens. Anything can get you kickstarted. A lot of things work for a period of time. And what I was sharing about earlier when I was talking about wisdom versus knowledge, I think books that help you teach how to think are much more helpful in the long term, so that you can use your own inner wisdom to then personalize it. And I think a great place to start is traditionally, right? Let's take the classic sort of government line, health, ministry line, which is, it's kind of a calories in and a calories out game, right? Eat less, exercise more has been the motto for many health institutions. And then as the movement of the Whole Foods started coming in, it's like, look, no, it's really not just about calories in and out. It's about the quality. Food is information, food is medicine. That's fantastic. A new piece of the puzzle that's new for a lot of people that I feel that you're bringing into this book is that actually, when it comes to the topic of weight loss, what you actually put into your mouth might not be the most important thing. And I feel like that's a deeper layer of sophistication that we're now bringing. Tell us what that means and how you arrived to that conclusion to put that advice inside of the book.
The book is split up, right, into 5 parts, which is what I think was my fresh take on this topic, because I didn't want to write something that had already been written. I wanted to contribute something to the world that I felt was fresh, or certainly a different perspective and a take on this topic. And there's, what you eat, why you eat, how you eat, when you eat, and where you eat, as a way of really thinking about this in a slightly different way. And what you're speaking to there, Drew, is my favorite part of the book, which is the why we eat section, which I think gets missed out of the entire conversation. Yes, around weight loss, but even around health. It's like, this is what you should be doing. You should be eating this. You should be moving this way. You want to be doing this. And it's like, well, a few years ago, I asked myself the question. I think most people who are trying to lose weight or improve their health at the moment probably know that eating chips or sugar or pastries or ice cream on the sofa in the evening whilst watching television is probably not going to be helping them. I think most people, not everyone, but a lot of people who are trying to lose weight know that already. So I thought, they already know that. They've already got that information. They've already got that knowledge, right, in their brains. Yet despite them wanting to improve their health, despite them knowing that this is not helping them, they're still engaging in it. We see this all the time. We all, myself included, you mentioned the pandemic there and how there was a period of time where my sugar intake really went up for a few weeks, which was quite surprising to me because it hadn't been like that for many, many years. And, there's some deep-rooted layers there, which I'm very happy to talk about later if you want to. But it was really interesting that I thought, well, telling people what they should be doing is not enough. Why are people engaging in behaviors that their rational brain will tell you that they don't want to be? And it's because of stress. It's because of emotions. And this whole piece of emotions is something that I don't feel we're talking about enough. I think there are really great spiritual books on emotions. There are really deep books that go into emotions. But what I like to think I bring to the wellness space is, I like to think of myself as an expert generalist. So I feel instead of getting super specialized into an area, it's like I want to take that 30,000-foot view and put it all together for someone and go, okay, look, yeah, I'm going to talk to you about your diet, but I'm also going to talk to you about stress, your emotional health, your sleep quality, movement, how you're eating, mindful eating, the timing of eating, the environment. I wanted to put it all together for people. So on that subject of emotions, Dhru, it's kind of like this pandemic is a prime example because in the UK, and I know in the US as well, many people have been putting on weight during this time. Many people, including people in the wellness space. And I know different parts of the world have got different restrictions. As we record this conversation, Dhru, we are still in a full UK lockdown that has been in place maybe since, I'm going to guess, the 28th, 29th of December. I mean, that is a long time in the British winter. It's been dark, it's been cold, and we've been on a full-on lockdown. That's our third lockdown. This impacts people's well-being. It impacts their stress. Of course, many people will have put on weight, and the media have all these terms: the Corona Stone, the Quarantine 15, and people are beating themselves up, and they're going, "Man, I know that I shouldn't be putting on weight at the moment. I know I'm seeing that if I carry excess weight or I'm obese, then I'm at higher risk of complications from COVID or any other problem, or most other health problems, I should say. Yet I can't stop and I'm putting on weight." But let's look at what the data actually says, Dhru. The data has been saying for a number of years, and depending on which trial you look at, it will give you slightly different figures. But roughly speaking, 85% of us change our eating behavior in response to stress. Okay, about 45, maybe nearly 50% of us eat more, and about 35 up to 40% or so eat less. Okay, so most of us change our eating behavior in response to stress. Not all of us. Some of us eat more. Almost half the population eat more. So if you are someone who has found yourself eating ice cream, eating the sweets, eating the chips on the sofa, eating more than you want to, do you need a new diet book telling you that that's not good? Is that really the problem? Well, if it's stress and your emotions that's driving the eating behavior, well, maybe you need help with your stress and your emotions. Maybe you don't need a new diet book. And this goes back to your first question, which is the whole conversation around weight loss has become far too one-dimensional. Eat less, move more. It's not quite factually correct with the new science, number one. But number two, it's misleading, and it makes people feel worse, because if somebody is eating less and moving more and they're not losing weight, then they've got a big problem. It's like, I am following the advice that I am being told, yet I'm getting heavier and heavier. There must be something wrong with me, or I need to push myself harder. I need to deprive more. I need to punish myself more. I need to restrict more. And I've seen this. And Joe, I talk about this this case study in the book, which probably illustrates this. I mean, it's quite deep, but I think these conversations need to be had, because there's a lot of people out there who are trying their best to follow the conventional health advice, and they are struggling. So you probably know the ACEs study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study that Dr. Vincent Felitti did a few years ago. And he showed a very powerful correlation between having adverse childhood experiences, whether that's physical abuse or emotional abuse or mental abuse, and obesity later on in life, right? That's incredible. We hadn't really been talking much about that. And it reminds me of a patient I saw a few years ago. And I think I started seeing her when she was about 19 or 20 years old. And she had been trying to lose weight for a number of years. She suddenly became overweight when she was 16, never had a problem before that. And she was trying all kinds of different diets. She was making herself feel really bad about herself. She couldn't lose any weight. And she came to see me for help. And I would see her regularly. And the more I got to talk to her, Dhru, the more I started to realize there's something else going on here. You just get that smell as a clinician that there's something else going on here. And as we started to unpick things, it turned out that when she was 16 years old, right? When she was 16 years old, she was in an abusive relationship, right? She was in a relationship with an older man who would abuse her physically. And she got quite tearful talking about this. And I felt very strongly that there was something going on at play here with her emotions, which was linked to her weight loss. So I sent her for some therapy. And it turns out that in that therapy, over a course of a number of sessions, she would see the therapist, she would see me, but we managed to unpick that actually for her, what happened was this. At the age of 16, she finds herself in an unsafe situation. She doesn't like it. When she's out of that situation, in her head, she never wants to be put in that position ever again. So what does she do? Her subconscious mind determines that for her, if she puts on weight, if she becomes fatter, okay, if she carries all this excess weight, in her mind, she was no longer going to be attractive to men, and therefore she would never be in that situation again. Now, once we managed to unpick that, everything started to become clear. She was getting therapy. She started to deal and process with those emotions. No kidding. Over the next 12 to 18 months, she started to lose significant amounts of weight. And she wasn't even really trying that hard. It was emotional baggage that she was holding on to, Dhru. And some people may think that that's quite an extreme case, but it is a lot more common than people think. And I tell you, Dhru, I thought long and hard before putting that in, because there are whole books written on this topic where you have to go through, like, Gabor Mate, I love Gabor. He's written some great books exploring all this, but they're deep books, right? You have to go deep and explore it. And I thought, okay, that's great. But there's a lot of people out there who won't be going into a Gabor Mate book. So I want to write a very easy to read book that's based on a lot of experience, a lot of science, but really bring that to life. And Dhru, I can tell you the amount of messages I have had on Instagram, a lot of private messages from women in particular saying, Dr. Chatterjee, I just want to say thank you for sharing that story. There's one lady I can remember clearly, this was back in January when the book came out in the UK, and she said, I can now clearly see why I've not been able to lose weight for 20 years. That is a carbon copy of my life. And because of reading that story, I phoned my doctor yesterday and have an appointment with a therapist. Thank you so much, because I'm now determined to go and tackle something that I've suppressed for the last 25 years.
Wow. Incredible.
And yeah, I mean, but Dhru, it's kind of, that is at one extreme, sure. But
I also don't know. I don't know if it is an extreme. I think sometimes people think it's an extreme, just like you were alluding to earlier. And yes, her story and her circumstances of being in an abusive relationship at 16 with the older person, sure, okay, maybe that not everybody can relate to that. But there's so many people that in other ways, you've done so many episodes on your podcast about inner work, whether it's with Gabor Mate or Peter Crone or, these other folks. I've had a lot of them on my podcast too. You've been very vocal in your last books. I think the thing that isn't extreme is we all have stuff, and that stuff can lead to imprints on our subconscious. And when we don't see or aren't aware of it, those patterns continue to play out in ways where we feel, why does this keep on happening to me? And I think it's important, and it's a message that I feel like I'm strongly getting inside of your book, which is, look, let's take a step back. It's not just, yes, what we are putting in our mouth is actually important. And there's a lot of low-hanging fruits that are there. We'll touch on some of them, but it's not the only component. Yes, sleep. Yes, exercise. Yes, these other components are there, but emotions is not getting, and spiritual work and inner work is not getting the love that it deserves. And I feel like it's finally starting to come into the world of health and wellness, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and what's interesting there for me, Dhru, is it's certainly not getting the love that it needs in the health and wellness space, although I think that's changing, but particularly in the weight loss space, right? Because weight loss has been seen as a very simple equation. And you get that equation right with calories in and calories out, and you're fine. That's the narrative. And I mean, we can unpick that in terms of where that can go wrong sometimes. But I'd ask everyone listening now just to think about this for a second. And I'm sure a lot of people who are into wellness, Dhru, listen to the show, right? And they're probably trying to engage in a lot of the things that you talk about. But ask yourself, do you always manage to stick to a whole food diet? Do you always get those 8 hours of sleep? Do you always switch off your phone 90 minutes before bed? Or does sometimes life get in the way? Because I think many of us, if we're really honest with ourselves, go, actually, you know what? Yeah, when everything's okay and life's going the right way, sure, I can stick to my sleep, my stress management, my diet. But when things start to get thrown off a little bit, what are my response patterns? What are my defaults? What do I go to? Why did I have a 4-week period? I think it was last summer, where I was suddenly having huge amounts of sugar every day, right? And Dhru, I'll say the old me 5 years ago, I would have been too scared to admit that on a public forum like this. I would have been thinking, hold on a minute. I'm writing books on wellness. I've written about sugar before. I'm trying to inspire people. What does that say about me if I do that? But actually, I've realized that actually that was a false construct of an identity that wasn't helpful, because actually owning up, being vulnerable and saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, I've sold over 500,000 books, right? I know this stuff, but I'm still a human being. I'm still a human being who struggles just like anyone else. And so when the pressure went up for me, right, what did I turn to? I turned to sugar to help me manage my stress. Even though my logical brain, my rational brain, I know that that's not going to be helpful for me. But that wasn't a logical, rational decision. It was an emotional decision. It was coming from a different part of the body. And what was interesting is at that time, I was actually processing some stuff from my childhood. And I remember in that time, I was thinking back to, I remember if I used to feel down when I was a kid, me and my brother, when my parents went around, we'd sneak into the kitchen. There was this like cookie jar there, and there were sweets and chocolate. So we would just sit there, and I would just sit there eating it. And I didn't know it at the time. I just thought, whatever, I'm just eating chocolate and sweets because I'm a kid. Now I can look back with clarity, go, oh, wow. You were soothing your emotions. You were, as I write in the book, I say many of us now, we used to eat to fill a hole in our stomachs. Now we eat to fill a hole in our hearts. I had a hole in my heart that I was trying to fill the void with sugar. And in processing things again last summer, when I was feeling very raw for a few weeks, I couldn't stop eating sugar. Now,
and if I could interject one thing on that, the other layer to it is that, I mean, I feel like you shared that, you saw that pattern and it being connected to your childhood, but also with the way that you live your life now and the, working out regularly and other stuff. There's no judgment on that, right? It's not good or bad. And also too, there's times where it's like you eat sugar and it's like, wow, that felt great. And I'm doing it consciously, knowing that I'm more stressed out right now. I'm reaching for the sugar. I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm okay with the other side of the repercussions with it.
Yeah. And Dhru, you just nailed it. That's the key point. This time when it happened, I did not beat myself up. I was like, oh, I get it. That's my way of managing it. I was trying to resist, but I couldn't. And it's that lack of judgment to it now that allows it to be a short-term blip, if you want to call it that. But let's not even call it a blip. It was a short-term mechanism that I needed to get me through. And now I don't need it anymore because I didn't attach judgment and shame and guilt to it. I didn't wake up. The truth is, I knew what was happening. I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Okay, fine. I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm not going to wake up the next day and go, wow, right, you're going to now go on an extreme detox for 2 weeks to make up for that. No, I was like, no, I'm over that. I don't need to do that anymore because actually I understand what that behavior was doing. And I feel we all need to really understand that every behavior we engage in, it serves a role. It's there for a reason, right? But too many times we buy the diet book and say, right, for the next 30 days, I'm not going to eat this, this, and this. I'm only going to eat these foods. Okay, great. I've nothing against that. I have done that before. I've used that approach in my patients before. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is that at some point, you need to not be looking externally for the answer. You need to, turn it around a little bit, put the mirror there and look at actually, well, what's going on here? Why do I turn to these certain behaviors at certain times? And I've got this really nice exercise in the book that I call the freedom exercise, or the 3 Fs, that I think, I think it'll be very powerful for the listeners because you can apply it to food. You can apply it to alcohol and social media use. You can apply it to anything really. But let's say somebody listening or watching this, Dhru, gets those sugar cravings at times. Let's say it's a dark evening. It's 9 p.m. You've got something on the television. You're watching a film and you feel like some ice cream, right? This is a fairly common scenario. So the first F is feel. Okay, so before you have the ice cream, just take a quick pause. You can journal it if you want, or you can just think about it. What am I really feeling? Am I really feeling hungry for food, or am I hungry for something else? Am I lonely? Am I bored? Am I stressed? What is that feeling? And just ask yourself, and then go ahead and eat it, right? But you're just starting to build in awareness. Awareness is always necessary for long-term change, not short-term change, long-term change. So just start to build on that awareness. The second F is feed. Okay, so next time it happens, go, okay, what am I feeling? Okay, I'm feeling stress. Okay, how does your chosen food feed that feeling that you've just identified? Okay. Oh, I was feeling stressed. When I eat ice cream, I feel less stressed. Okay, great. Go ahead and have it. But now you're just starting to join the dots in your mind about what's really going on. And then the third F is find. So the first F is, now that you know what the feeling is, now that you know how food feeds that feeling, the final F is find. Can you find a non-food behavior to feed that feeling? So if it is that, you're sort of I don't know, let's say you're feeling really lonely, you're stuck at home, you can't go out, you've not seen anyone all day, and in the evening you're feeling lonely, so the ice cream is going to make you feel better. Okay, maybe instead of that, you can phone a friend. Or, let's say you're feeling stressed and you would turn to chocolate to deal with your stress. Actually, you know what? Maybe I can run myself a bath, or maybe I can do 10 minutes of yoga on YouTube, or maybe I can, phone a friend, or maybe I've not spent much time with my partner. You know what? Instead of having this chocolate, let me go and get my partner and give her or him a cuddle. The point is, once you understand what the behavior is and how food plugs that hole, you can go, well, maybe I don't always need food. And then the converse is true. Well, maybe sometimes you go, yeah, you know what? I still want the ice cream anyway. Okay, great. But at least now you're doing it intentionally. You're doing it with knowledge, by understanding your emotions and going, yeah, you know what? Life is, at the moment in the UK, Dhru, the truth is this: I don't think anyone is bothered about weight loss, right? It's our third lockdown. It's been dark. It's been cold, and people can't go out. The restaurants and cafes are shut. Until a few days ago, schools had been shut for 3 months. So people are, parents are trying to homeschool. They're trying to work. They're trying to look after their kids. I mean, I think at the moment, food for many people is the only pleasure that they perceive themselves to have at night. So in the evening, it's like, no, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to eat what I want because there's nothing else to do at the moment. And you know what? If that is the case, the old me, I think, would have had a very different perspective, because I think it's okay to understand that. Now, I'm not saying we should ignore our health. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, I care about people's healths, right? I care about people making better decisions. But what I've realized is that you can't change people just by lecturing them, by trying to, give them information, more and more information. We need to understand. We need to help people understand, because when you build in that awareness, I found over and over again, Dhru, that people make changes.
To effectively treat this ubiquitous problem, we can focus on two aspects of health, and I'll elaborate. I'll dive into each of these in a little more detail. One is lower insulin by dietary changes, and two, it is lower stress. Now, let's start with number two, just because it's a simpler concept that I won't have to elaborate as much on. But with lower stress, I mean, change your external environment and your habits in such a way to help your stress hormones, namely cortisol and adrenaline, to come down. And the single most effective way to do that is better sleep habits. Now, that is the topic that few people enjoy hearing about, because, and I'm one of them, I'm a terrible sleeper. I just have a hard time staying asleep because my mind just starts racing. So I get it. But that is probably, in most people, the single greatest stressor, and resulting in high cortisol levels and adrenaline, or also called epinephrine. As those two stress hormones are up, they directly antagonize what insulin tries to do, making the body insulin resistant very rapidly. Even one bad night of sleep can cause demonstrable insulin resistance the next day. Now,
which leads to overeating the next day as well.
Oh yeah, that's right. You feel miserable. You have this sort of almost this desire just to kind of abuse your body. You're angry and you just want something to kind of help you feel a little better. Well, it's going to be some junk food of some kind, or some sugary loaded alcohol. So lower the stress by improving sleep habits. I'll just kind of leave it there because there's a lot that would go into that. And then lowering insulin, I think, is the single most important variable. And that does mean altering the diet. And to me, there are four pillars, 4 legs that this table is built on. First of all, control carbohydrates. That is the low-hanging fruit. That ought to be step number 1. Change the diet around to eliminate processed starches and sugars and focus on more whole, like truly whole carbohydrates, namely fruits and vegetables. Let most of your carbohydrates, if not all of them, come from fruits and vegetables. Very much scrutinize the grains like rice and wheat and corn. Focus on fruits and vegetables and eat them, don't drink them. If someone is just eating fruits and vegetables, they're going to be doing it the right way. So first step, control your carbohydrates. That is the food that spikes insulin really the most. It's really the only one. And then 2, prioritize protein. Make sure that as you are restricting the carbohydrates, focus on high quality proteins. And Dhru, it's not a popular sentiment to elaborate on that, but I'm gonna. That is, focus on animal protein. This whole explosion of plant protein is, I don't know how else to say it, just a marketing gimmick. In every way, plant protein is inferior to animal protein. It doesn't have the kind of full complement and mix of amino acids, mitigating the benefit of that plant protein. It also, every plant protein has things in it called anti-nutrients, actual molecules that inhibit our ability to digest the protein. So we're not only getting not a great mix of protein and the amino acids, but we can't even get the ones we're eating because there are things like phytic acids, tannins, trypsin inhibitors in all of these proteins, like soy protein, pea protein. It doesn't matter. Every one of them has these anti-nutrients that block some of our ability to digest. And then one last point, these plant proteins also have high levels of heavy metals. This has been revealed through an independent party, an independent group called the Clean Label Project, and they found that plant proteins were the highest offenders, having potentially toxic levels of lead and arsenic. And that's because plants naturally get enriched to some degree with minerals, with metals from the soil. That's a natural process. But we have made it unnatural by trying to get protein from something we shouldn't get protein from. Like, for example, peas. If we want to get a serving of protein from peas, we need like 1,000 peas because peas are so deficient in protein naturally. We've got to concentrate all of those amino acids to get a serving of protein. That's what we want. That's the desired outcome. The inadvertent outcome also, as we're concentrating all that stuff from the peas, is we get too much of the metals that are naturally growing into peas. Now, if someone just eats some peas, the amount of mineral they're getting is inconsequential. It's insignificant. It's nothing. It's only when we've now artificially concentrated them, now we're getting dangerous, potentially dangerous levels of these metals. So prioritize protein. Make sure you're getting enough protein. And that's the best sources demonstrably are whey and egg whites, but just eggs, I would say, and then any kind of meat as well. So those are the proteins that someone should focus on. And then step number 3 is fill all remaining calories with fat. The power of dietary fat is that fat has no effect on insulin. Protein has a modest effect on its own, but fat has no effect. And in nature, those best protein sources that I just mentioned come with fat. It is a fact of nature. The best proteins come with fat, and that's a synergistic mix where fat helps the body digest and use protein better. Fat and protein is healthier and more anabolic than protein alone. So all these efforts of people to get like a protein shake and it's just like pure whey, that's unnatural. We're not meant to eat just protein without the fat. So let the fat be a natural part of the diet. And 2 points we made earlier, focus on animal fats and fruit fats. And the fruit fats are generally coconuts and olives and avocados. So the difference with those fats is our ancestors simply need, and even now, you just take the flesh of that fruit, not the seed, not the pit, but the flesh of it, and just squish it. You compress it, and now you have the oil. Even it requires as little force as just our own body. You know, we could just physically be stepping on the coconut or the olives, and we're getting that oil. We as a species have been eating those fats, animal fats and fruit fats, since time immemorial. We are well adapted to those. Avoid scrupulously these industrial seed oils like soybean oil, cottonseed, canola, etc. And that matters because at least in the US, and it's most certainly the same in other countries, it's just not as well measured, soybean oil is the single most commonly consumed fat in the American diet. So someone listening to this would think, well, I don't eat soybean oil. Yeah, you do. If you're eating a packaged food, it is very, very likely the fat in it is going to be from something like soybean oil, if not soybean oil itself. So fill with fat. That's rule number 3, but focus on animal and fruit fats. And then the 4th pillar is watch the clock. Don't feel the need to eat all the time. So engage in this idea of time-restricted eating or intermittent fasting. You know, give yourself an eating window, you know, where you have eating, you know, you're fasting for 20 hours in the day and you eat during the 4 or whatever. Let your body take a break from eating to help insulin stay low. And when it's time to eat, eat. And eat as much as you feel like you need to. Don't worry about the calories. That's not what that idea is based on. But just engage in some form of intermittent fasting.
Yeah, and the one caveat that I want to include inside there, and obviously, you know, you're deep in this space, is that there does seem to be some difference between a little bit men and women. Not that women can't enjoy the benefits of the fasting, but women with their infradian rhythm, especially in a childbearing age, and again, this is where it's like about paying attention to your body, they may not benefit the same exact extreme fast that men benefit from. So, obviously figuring that out, dialing that in. We've done a couple episodes on the topic that we'll link to in the show notes, but in general, obviously everybody recommends fasting. Just tweak it to, your body and, who you are.
Well said. Yep. Well said. So anyway, those are the 4 pillars. So to kind of sum it all up, the best ways to improve insulin resistance, which is very improvable. That is very much something we can start to change within a day. You can start to improve your insulin resistance. It is lower stress, most especially through better sleep habits, and then lower the insulin through, at least the four recommendations that I just outlined.
Yeah. Fantastic. Do you want to give so many people are talking about movement, but do you want to just give a quick reminder of why movement is so important when it comes to insulin?
Yeah. So you'd mentioned already one of the most relevant variables there, which is muscle is the main consumer of glucose. So let's let the muscle eat that glucose. Even in someone who's insulin resistant and insulin wasn't working as well at the muscle, the power or the beauty of the muscle is that it has an insulin independent channel or back door to pull in glucose. So if a muscle starts to contract, we start to work that muscle in that dynamic rhythm of contract and relax, it starts to do what insulin would do. So even though the muscle is resistant to insulin, we enable the muscle to start pulling in glucose on its own without the need of insulin. And thus, of course, if we're lowering glucose, we lower insulin better. And indeed, during the course of an exercise session, insulin comes down, and there is a demonstrable improvement in insulin sensitivity during and following the exercise. And then importantly, Dhru, I would encourage people, don't finish your exercise with a carbohydrate-rich meal. There's a study in humans to show that if someone exercises, the insulin sensitizing benefits even continue to the next day. But if at the end of that exercise session, they eat a load of carbohydrates, they undo that insulin sensitizing effect of the exercise. So very commonly, people will finish their exercise and they'll think, oh, well, now I'm going to indulge. I'm going to eat this fruit smoothie or this, starchy cereal or bread or whatever. No, don't. You're undoing much of the benefit of the exercise.
Fantastic recommendations. This has really been great for myself and the audience. We referred to it a couple times, but I don't think everybody knows exactly what it is. So, we're both wearing continuous glucose monitors, right? For anybody not familiar, it's typically something that, people who are trying to manage their diabetes would use as a way to kind of like look at their glucose levels in the body to determine, if they need how much insulin they needed. And now these continuous ones are ones that tap into your phone or a monitor and are constantly giving you readings every minute to let you know what your blood sugar is. And obviously both Ben and I don't have diabetes and we're not pre-diabetic. We're just wearing it to optimize blood sugar. So in the case of these, and there's different popular ones out there. I'm wearing a Dexcom 6. Which one are you wearing?
Yeah, the Libre Freestyle.
Yeah, the Libre Freestyle, which is also the other very popular one. Do you recommend people who want to go down that pathway and dial in it a little bit more, go explore one of these devices?
Oh, absolutely. So I am delighted that I've been working with a company called Levels, and Levels has created an app that basically couples to the CGM and gives you this kind of continuous metabolic score. But the power in any CGM device is that you see what happens. Everything we're talking about, it just seems sort of esoteric or kind of just purely academic. But when they actually see their glucose levels changing in real time, they can't help but start to take steps into self-induced change. So the dietary pillars that I just outlined, someone who's flipped them all and has focused their diet more on carbohydrates, they will see, wow, I eat that sandwich, that same sandwich that I've always eaten at lunch, and it spikes my glucose up to 180 or 190, and it takes 90 minutes or 2 hours before it comes back down. They see that, and they will immediately then start to make their own changes willingly, which is so powerful, where it's not someone making a change because they're being told to make it, being scolded into obedience. They make it because they've seen what happens in their own bodies. So I think much of the power of the CGM and getting it in as many hands as we can is that it empowers a person to make their own changes because they see what's happening, how they have this massive spike and then perhaps very often this little kind of dip into the negative, so to speak, below where they were before, which puts them into a state of higher hunger acutely. They think, I don't want that. I want to get off that roller coaster. I just want my glucose levels to hum along. That will naturally lead them to the pillars I mentioned: control carbs, prioritize protein, fill with fat. In so doing, they'll see that normal glycemia, and they'll feel empowered. So I do think there's tremendous utility in CGMs. And I think the sooner we start eliminating barriers to access the CGM that we have in the US, where the barrier is commonly you need a physician to write you a prescription for it, and even then the insurance will just cover it for a limited time. But the sooner we start widely using this, we can start bringing the price down of these devices, and people can just start using them like you and I are, that you and I are fortunate enough to be able to do, which is doing it out of curiosity and a genuine desire to optimize our own health.
Yeah. And I 100% agree. I had my doctor write a prescription, but it wasn't covered by insurance, and I just bought the device outright. For anybody listening, that's going to cost, with the sensors and the refill packs, that's going to be about $400 to $700 dependingly. And not everybody is ready or has the resources to spend that. So we do need technology. We need to remove those barriers and continue to innovate, because I do see a future where everybody's wearing this, and we're having massive changes in health because you immediately get that instantaneous feedback, the equivalent of like, whoa, this is really wreaking havoc on your blood sugar. Maybe you should pay attention. And if anybody gets that feedback regularly enough, they're going to make changes that are there and not rely on willpower, which obviously is not a good long-term strategy. There is something that you talk about inside of the book that is so central to fat burning and just our overall how our body feels, our immune system, and that's diversity of gut microbiome. Because I'm sure people hit you up all the time, and there's the question of like, okay, great, which probiotic should I take? You're talking about the gut microbiome. What specific probiotic, what brand, what company should I take to fix this whole situation, which is basically we're looking for a pill in the world of the pharmaceutical world, but then we've trained ourselves to look for a pill in the wellness world. And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
Guide us through that.
And you're bringing up a little bit of a sore spot too, because we unknowingly can tend to do this. We're still taking an allopathic approach where we go from and we become basically what I did early on, which is become a natural pill popper, and it was helpful. There's definitely wonderful supplements, but recently the data has made a shift in showing that it went from about, somewhere around 5% of all liver related kind of intake injuries from drugs or supplements to supplements skyrocketing to, 10, 15, 20% of hospitalizations related to liver injuries. So number one, the industry itself is not very well regulated, but
so
also
that could include like natural not natural contamination, but even just straight up, since so many supplements come from, nefarious places, it could be arsenic, lead, contamination, and a lot of times what's on the bottle, because again, it's unregulated, may not actually be what's even inside of there.
Right. And just the intelligence that food carries and versus a synthetic supplement. And of course, we want to lean towards whole food-based supplements and things that have just been around for a little bit of time, but we have to be more mindful of this in and of itself. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out in looking at supplementing our way into it, because for 15 years, I've been having, clients coming in, putting them on probiotics, but a lot less in the recent or towards the end of my clinical practice. And it's because I finally got it. The probiotics do not care. You could take probiotics until, I don't know, like I've got some crazy analogy in my mind, but you could just keep taking probiotics until you become a probiotic. But they're not going to actually proliferate and
They don't
stay
colonize
in your system, exactly, unless they have their preferred food source. You have to have the foods that the specific strains of bacteria eat. And this gets into the conversation of this term prebiotic, which is it's become another thing we put in a pithy little box. Prebiotics is basically every food. Every real food provides food for specific bacterias, period. And yet we have like this camp of, and I do, of course, like I shared the general best practices with probiotics, the asparagus and Jerusalem artichoke and onions and garlic, all this stuff. But that's surface level. And then we get into inulin, we get into resistant starches. These are all things we got really great data on, them providing food sources to the microbes that are most associated with a healthy body composition, a healthy circulation, healthy blood sugar. We've got microbes that are associated with all this stuff. If we feed them correctly, they can stick around. It's kind of in my head, like even when I was about to make that analogy, it's like a Full House episode. Like we got to have everything right. Uncle Jesse has to have his stuff. The twins, you got it, dude.
Their own room.
Yes.
Everybody needs their own space.
But they can all work together. And that was a thing in the data most associated with because I already shared how the microbiome affects rates of obesity. How do we fix this? What we know today is that microbiome diversity is directly, as diversity goes up, obesity goes down. All right. We need to increase this gut diversity. And then what they did was they looked at samples from folks eating more of an indigenous diet, hunter-gatherer tribes. They found that their diversity versus a Western world citizen eating a kind of conventional diet, they have 4 times, 5 times, 10 times more diversity in their microbes than the average person does today. And knowing the diversity, again, as the diversity goes up, obesity goes down. As diversity goes down, obesity goes up. All manner of problems goes up. Then immediately we're just like, again, like, let me just take a probiotic. Let me get this diversity up. It doesn't work like that. There are some experts who believe that if you want to make the analogy of the microbiome being like a rainforest, there are some experts who believe that many of these microbes that are critical for human health are either endangered or they're extinct.
Right.
And I don't like to think in extremes or talk unless it's truly, truly there. I believe that we can improve, especially if there's other people walking around that have those bacteria. And this is seen in the data with these fecal transplants and people having complete transformations of their health and their microbiome and even their body composition from fecal transplants in both positive and negative ways, depending on the health of the person they get it from. So I don't like to speak in extremes that it's impossible, but we definitely have to do something differently. And I think the big walkaway point is for the bacteria associated. So there's like Bacteroidetes and like Firmicutes. There's like 2 camps, 2 general camps. There's so much more. There's Bifido and we could do a whole thing just talking about that. But Firmicutes are kind of associated with obesity and Bacteroidetes is more associated with healthy body composition. And so the saying is, if you want to be firm and cute, you need to reduce the Firmicutes. All right. I didn't make that up. All right. But how do we do that? And the thing that we know for certain is that if we increase the diversity of our foods, the prebiotics we're bringing in, we can reduce the amount of Firmicutes and increase the amount of Bacteroidetes. So this goes to, even if we're eating healthy, because I know a lot of folks who listen to this do subscribe to a healthier protocol, but our frameworks can get us so trapped that we become imprisoned by them and we get into our own little ruts, like every day it's avocado toast and, broccoli and the green juice, whatever, like you just put the stuff on repeat. And even if you get different stuff during the day, every week it's the same. We have to bring in a diversity of foods. That's how we evolved. If you go back again, the things that put up a red flag for me, we evolved having different foods at different times of the year. Today, our lives are very different. All we have to do, we don't got to go through a season. We just got to go to the refrigerator. We can eat whatever we want, whenever we want.
Do you try to, as a family, you, your wife, your kids, do you try to intentionally seek out foods that you don't normally include? Let's say that's not in the standard, I just showed up to Whole Foods in the vegetable aisle.
Yeah, definitely now, of course, in writing this book is more intentional for sure. And even just the exposure that I've had working at a university for so many years and my wife being from Kenya, you know, and so like
Me
my
too.
mother-in-law.
Shout out to your wife.
Shout out to Kenya. And so my mother-in-law being over recently and her cooking, you know, the dangu, you know, like the mung beans and chele, the rice and, you know, chapati, but she like upgrades the chapati and like uses like all of these heirloom grains and things like that. But things that normally I wouldn't on paper. What about the lectins? What about the anti-nutrients? All these things, they are remarkably healthy. Like as a culture, eating their traditional diet, like her mother like was just thriving, you know? And her mother is actually one of the healthiest people that I know, but it wasn't like that. When she moved here from Kenya, she had arthritis so bad, eating more of the American, she ended up having to walk with a cane because she was in so much pain. Right before we moved from St. Louis to LA, her and I were at the track doing sprints together.
That's incredible.
You know, to see that transformation, oh my goodness. You know what I mean?
I mean, for so many of my family members, you know, who are from India or were born in Kenya, you know, 4th generation Kenyan, a lot of my family that came from over there, they would healthy, you know, doing pretty good. Okay, there wasn't an abundance of processed foods, especially sugars, like the way that there's sugar and ketchup and tomato sauce and everything like that. So they didn't have the perfect diet over there, but the food was less adulterated.
Right.
There was less seed oils and other things like that. But even coming here, so many of them had issues with beans and lentils and other things, and then forgot that, wow, for generations, we've been using a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
Right. Even myself, I had issues with beans. I went vegan and I was eating just a ton of, you know, all that food over there and always have gastrointestinal stuff. And only was it in the last couple years that I decided to go back and have some of those foods and realize like, wow, when my mom makes it at home, I have no issue. Or when we go to India or when I went to Kenya a few years ago, I have no issue with these foods if they're prepared in the right process and method they were prepared in previously.
Yeah. And we both of us, we know the guys who've really pressed that into popular culture with the science around the lectins and things like that. Right. But so these anti-nutrients, but here's the thing, we have to, any diet framework, and this with Eat Smarter, it's a unifier. It's a unifier of diets because a lot of us in this community, we've been debating about the minutia, not understanding. Most folks are still doing the food pyramid, trying to change their health, you know,
instead of cut down soda and
the basic stuff.
Yeah.
But what we need to do is, what I looked at was what are the things, no matter what diet protocol you're subscribed to, whether it's a vegan protocol, keto protocol, here's the things that we know for certain will make that successful. Here's the things we know for certain, regardless of the diet you're doing, regardless of the exercise program that you have, these things are going to diminish that diet because it's really geared towards designing a promotion of fat storage, no matter what diet you're on. And so,
if I could interject with one thing. So I started wearing a continuous glucose monitor early in the year. And I think I had the experience that a lot of people have when they wear it is that, so even if you think you're eating healthy and you go into detail in the book and you especially have this 30-day plan, which I love, by the way. It's a new year. Everybody wants a plan. There's a great plan that's inside this book. So definitely get the book. But there's so many foods that even if you think you're eating healthy, that these companies, they're well-intentioned, right? They're trying to make alternatives. They're trying to make alternative tortillas. They're trying to make a keto bar that's available for you. But it's got cassava, it's got almond flour, it's got other stuff. Again, a formalization of processing doesn't mean that we can't have it ever. But if we miss the boat on how we used to eat, then we can unintentionally end up being an unhealthy, healthy eater.
Yeah.
And you see when you eat those foods, how much it spikes your blood sugar and how you can end up in a situation where, you know, a lot of my friends are, you know, over the last 5-10 years been having kids. And a lot of the women especially were shocked. These are women that think that they eat so healthy, spend a ton of money on groceries, were shocked to find that they have, you know, they're on borderline diabetes. What's the term? Gestational diabetes, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're like, how the hell could I, as a healthy eater, be in this situation? And basically your book is explaining how. If we don't understand how these things work inside the body, we're not going to know what to do to get ourselves out of the mess.
There's two things with
Please.
this. This is so good. Number one, and I talk about this in the book, you can have the best diet in the world that's managing your blood sugar. It's not going to matter because stress can elevate your blood sugar just as much as any nefarious food can, all right, because of the action of cortisol. So that's one aspect. So I just want to implant that seed, but then circle back to what you said earlier, which is, and this is so important. When I mentioned earlier about the prebiotics, we have to look at our lineage. And this is where the conversation we started talking about Kenya. What does your genes expect you to eat? If we can look at your ancestors and maybe get a little bit closer to those foods, maybe it might be healing for you, but this diet framework says you can't have it. I'm inviting everybody to take back control and giving them permission to give themselves permission to eat what's best for them. And if it doesn't fit into that diet framework, if we want to be the best us, we have to be willing to just trust to experiment and try something else. Okay, so to give you an example, in mentioning beans or just a paleo protocol, and somebody might pull out all of these potentially inflammatory foods, right? Beans, rice. When I was in school, my professors taught me anything that's white just ain't right. Okay, so brown everything, brown bread, brown rice, brown pasta. And I remember the day I went to this Chinese food restaurant that I usually go to, and I was watching them, the owner's kids eating like white rice and like some steamed vegetables, whatever. And I'm just like, don't they get it? White rice is bad for you, like how do they not know this, But dude, for centuries, they've known. It wasn't just because to make it look pretty. It's because there's a potential gut irritant there in the bran of the rice, So just let's remove that, strip it away. And, it's not that this is a super nutrient dense food. It's not making rice into a health food or white rice into a health food. But the brown rice can be a potential gut irritant for some people. But also that's where the fiber is found, additional nutrients, right? And so how do we reduce the amount of those lectins? Again, you mentioned earlier, pressure cooker, soaking, sprouting. Food was made differently back in the day. A lot of stuff, even breads were regularly fermented before, the finished product that you end up eating. Now, here's the thing. If you go and pull out entire categories of foods that your ancestors have been eating for centuries, you might get some initial results doing that, right? Somebody might, again, do a protocol that says, take away all these lectin-containing foods. And again, we know the guys, and a lot of that science it's absolutely valid. However, if your gut bacteria, like one of we'll just say a couple of bacteria strains that are most associated with healthy body composition for you and your ethnicity, and now it doesn't have its preferred food because it's stripped out along with everything else. And maybe the way you was preparing it was the problem. Now that strain of bacteria is gone. So maybe you lost weight just because of just inflammation or whatever things, you're bringing in more nutrients. The first year worked. And then all of a sudden the weight's coming back. And you're just like, I just need to paleo harder. I need to vegan harder. It's not working anymore. I've just got off my game. It's not, that's where we direct it to us. It's our fault. Instead of having the awareness that the framework itself, even though it worked at one time, your unique metabolic fingerprint can change. And we have to provide the nutrients for the bacteria that keeps us healthy. If we don't have that food for that bacteria strain. And so I just want to encourage a little bit more caution with folks completely eliminating foods, especially if their ancestors ate that food.
Right.
However, but not to say that the food that their ancestor was eating was good for them. We have to have both. We have to have a little bit more intelligence and patience with ourselves. And however, the industry, the diet industry, the book industry is very much, and I face this, and this is why this book took this time, because I wanted to get it right.
It's a sophisticated book.
Yes.
Right? For whether you're a beginner, but even if you're more advanced, it's going to take you on the journey of layers.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a lot of things in life. Just like we've done episodes on, let's say, any kind of controversial topic, right? Okay, you can show this thing or you could show this other thing. Let's take in the layers of sophistication needed to work through and deduct actually what's going on so that we can make the right decision for us.
That's it. But they will tell you, and without saying the words, that people aren't smart enough. Just tell them what to do. Just tell them what to eat. And there are personality types that just want to be told what to do. Absolutely. But how has it served us? It has not worked thus far. I want to make sure that we have the tools, the education, the insights to make the best decisions for us right now. Give people the tools so that if a diet practice doesn't work 6 months from now or a year from now, they have the ability to pivot. They have the overall awareness and self-intelligence. And that's the key. At the end of the day, I'm directing folks continuously back to themselves, because the very best biomarker we have is how you feel. But we're not taught on paper. Again, we're very big on objective measurements, and I love objective measurements. I'm obsessed with them. But subjectively, how you feel, name something more important than that. I'll wait.
That's it. You'll know. You'll know whether you feel good, whether you don't feel good.
However, if we are so externally focused, man, and this is the issue that we're dealing with today, we're so distracted. We're so pressured. We're so inundated with so much stuff that we're not listening to what's happening. We're not listening when the body is, because that little discomfort, the digestive discomfort, it's a signal that something is off. Your body's giving you some feedback that something needs to change. But if you ignore it, and you ignore it for a week, 2 weeks, months, that alarm starts to fade into the background. It's not that it disappeared, it's just fade into the background. We come to accept it as normal. And now your body is screaming at you in another symptom. So this gastrointestinal issue is now turned into, severe psoriasis, or it's turned into issues, with your sleep quality. Now you have insomnia, whatever the case might be. Your body is going to keep trying to give you feedback. And if we don't listen to the small signals. So with those said, just paying attention to how we look, feel, and perform. Being able to see ourselves. We see ourselves every day like, oh, that's different. Just paying attention to ourselves and seeing how things affect us. Like if we're there with our food and we eat a meal and we feel especially like good, we got to take that mental note, because there's also something that I talk about in Eat Smarter that I'm really wanting to bring to popular culture is this very important tenet in nature, which is post-ingestive feedback. Food will tell you when you eat a food, your body is literally taking notes. Oh, okay, we got selenium from that. We got some copper from that. We got some magnesium from that. Your body is taking notes. So like, if when I eat this thing, I get these things. And how we evolved this post-ingestive feedback, flavors are basically like nutrition labels in nature. And flavors are associated with specific foods. Today, those waters have become a little bit muddy because of food manufacturers manipulating our ability to have that post-ingestive feedback. Because now we can make a thing taste like another thing, right? We can make some tofu taste like chicken. It might not be the exact, but when your body's eating that thing and it's not getting the nutrients that it's associated with, it starts to create this dissonance, So these are other parts that we're healing. I'm working on, okay, you might not even know it's happening, but we're clearing up the static on the line so that post-ingestive feedback is starting to work again, because your body is innately intelligent and food has an intelligence. And this is something that Mark said a long time ago. The food isn't just food, it's information. And what are you programming your cells to do? And once we can upgrade that stuff, man, it starts to get really good.
It starts to get really good. And also there's a deeper sense of peace inside of us and our relationships. So shout out to your wife. You dedicate the book to her. And I want to segue, using that as a segue into food and relationships. There's a section inside of the book about that. Tell us about what we need to know about how food can impact those relationships.
Yeah. For me, this is really the heart of the book. And we have to give people what they want. A lot of folks today, a big issue, of course, is our body composition, metabolism, and just providing the very best information on that. But food is one of the most powerful determinants on how we relate to other people. And as a matter of fact, just socially, everything we do is really revolved around food. It's how we evolved. And so food isn't something we could put in this pithy little box, and also our environment affects what we eat, but what we eat also affects our environment. And so to put that into context for people, there was a really interesting study, and this was conducted by researchers at The Ohio State University. They wanted to see how folks having dysregulated blood sugar, how does that affect their ability to relate with their partner, who they love? This is their partner. This is somebody that they're in a loving relationship with. And there's this term now called hangry, but like we take this is a real thing. And so what they found was, and this is something we do all the time in our culture regularly, is we eat a food that creates this, big blood sugar response, and then we go hypoglycemic. Our blood sugar drops. And for us, how we evolved, that's a very, very strong sign of danger. And so your body responds by increasing cortisol, increasing adrenaline when your blood sugar crashes. And so what they found was that folks who were in a relationship, when they were able to create dysfunction with their blood sugar, they found it far less likely for folks to resolve their relationship problems. And they found that they were much more aggressive towards their partner. Now, we kind of know this. These are things we might experience in our lives, but we've never really pay attention to it. If you look at it, so often we get into conflicts when we're hungry or nutrient deprived, we'll put it like that, when we're tired, when we're stressed, and we tend to translate that over to our partner, these kind of but these are biological issues. Like we can know, I love this person. I know they're not against me, but right now it feels like they are totally against me.
Us versus them in this moment.
Yeah. They're on team hate me, but the reality is often very different. And so let's stretch this out into another domain and look at directly how, because now we have data on how food affects our proclivity towards violence, for example. And this was highlighted in a study. This was conducted by researchers at Oxford University. And they took prison inmates, which is, on one hand, it's unfortunate because of the situation, but on the other side, with science, it's a ward study. So they're able to track everything. So you get some really great data back. But also it's great because you can see when folks think about prison inmates, they have a picture in their mind. They're probably aggressive, violent even. They probably don't follow the rules, whatever. We have these associations mentally, whatever they might be. Here's what they found. They took some of the inmates and they gave them improved nutrition in the form of supplements. Okay. So increased vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, which we know are critical. And we'll talk about this in a moment. And then they gave another group of the inmates placebos. All right. 3-month study. And here's what they found. The inmates that were able to receive increased nutrition had a 40% reduction in behavioral offenses, all right, simply by increasing their nutrition versus a placebo. Also, and this was most shocking for me, these folks had a 37% drop in violent offenses simply by improving their nutrition. Now, how many folks are out here walking around that are deficient in critical nutrients that are helping to regulate their emotional stability, that's helping to regulate their mental capacity and just the ability of their executive function of their brain to be like, that's not a good idea. I don't need to respond like this. Most of us, again, we are the sickest nation in the history of humanity, self-inflicted, all right? 135 million Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic right now. It's not a joke. So we're talking about blood sugar dysregulation. It's not a joke. Over 60% of the US population has some degree of heart disease right now. 70% of us are already on pharmaceutical drugs. 115 million of us are regularly sleep deprived. This is not the best us showing up. And now here's the thing. I want to make sure this is clear. When we're not well, it's not that it's impossible to have patience and perspective taken, to not be aggressive towards another person. It's just harder. It's harder.
You can tap into it, but it's almost like you got to tap into reserves, or you got to find another study like meditation, which are all beautiful things. Yeah. It just, you have to work harder towards them.
Yeah. And the point I really want to make and really help to impress us upon culture is that food matters. Food affects how we show up and how we relate to other people. And right now we have a lot of infighting that's going on with humanity in our country. Particularly, we're just seeing this at a level we've never seen before. And so many people feel frustrated. Like, why won't they listen? Why won't they listen to this logic? Why won't they just understand? And we have a lot of folks who are not well, who are facing off against other folks who are not well.
Hey YouTube, if you liked this mashup, you're gonna love this interview that I did with Dr. Ben Bikman, all on the mind-blowing science of fat burning and insulin resistance.
So insulin resistance is this it really is an epidemic that is the single most common health disorder in the world. In the US alone, it affects